Hello and welcome to this CresFest world. That great funky playing is from the Haas Sisters of the USA, international guests at CresFest in 2023. My name's Neil Adam, and somehow I found myself enmeshed in the setting up of CresFest, a music festival which takes place every year in April in Creswick, a small Victorian town 15 minutes from Ballarat, maybe 90 minutes out of Melbourne. Organising a music festival in a small country town puts you in touch with all kinds of interesting people. Some are local, some are not. Some are musicians, some are not. Some of the chat is about music, and guess what? Some is not. Welcome to episode 22, which of course means there are another 21 that you can go back and listen to. One of the great privileges of CresFest is that it's thrown me together with incredible, imaginative and thoughtful people I might otherwise never have met. Two such are Cate Kennedy and James Freemantle. We hadn't known each other long when the plan was hatched to interview artists and others live in front of audiences at CresFest. The experiment was a great success, and in 2025 it's going to be in its third year. In today's podcast, you'll hear me talking with Cate and James about the whys and wherefores of interviewing, looking back on memorable past interviews, and introducing the artists they're going to be interviewing at CresFest 25. I started off by asking Cate and then James to introduce themselves.
I'm a writer, so I spend a fair bit of time by myself in my own room, talking to my imaginary friends, if mainly what I'm doing is writing fiction, I suppose, or at the moment I'm collaborating on a screenplay, so it's very much being in your own headspace. And I kind of realised over the COVID era, much as I like doing that alone, there's also something beautiful about collaboration and working with other artists or listening with other writers, for example, and colleagues and other people who have been on a similar journey, I suppose, of making things. And that's really what I think most artists are interested in. They're interested in how to be a maker in the world. How do you make something happen out of nothing, really, and then you change things. It's transformational, really, when it's good. Music is a great example of that. So I am not a musician and I'm not a performer, really, but I'm not frightened of performing. If someone asks me to, read a poem for a wedding or a funeral or sing a little something on someone's birthday, I will do it because I like that, being able to say, yes, I'm going to step into this moment and be part of the thing that's being made in this moment. So it's a great thing for me because mainly as I said, I'm a writer. I used to be a community worker, community development worker. And so I was very much looking for ways to make kind of good things happen, make little theatre productions happen or a night of readings or soirees or get people to make, murals and so on. Just making things out of nothing is really interesting, and it's going to fascinate me for the rest of my life, I guess. And I think music's an interesting thing in that way because, people take an instrument and they conjure something with it, And I guess my instrument is language, but I'm fascinated by people whose instrumentation is something else because something changes in people when they're in the presence of that transformative power. So I love being in my own little world, but also stepping out of that occasionally and being in this kind of world.
James, can I ask you to introduce yourself?
I think I'm a curious person. I've always been curious about people and about experiences and adventures and lived a life that is not what you'd call a linear career journey, from prawn fishing to jackarooing to being an actor or thinking I was an actor for a few years and doing bit parts on Neighbours and in fact being a furniture maker to survive. And so, like Kate, I love making things. Perhaps mine are more physical, solid, tangible in a way. There's nothing better, I think, than finishing a dining table and polishing it up and having people use it and writing where the timber came from, all secondhand timber, writing where it came from underneath the table. And 20 years later, that people have still got that family dining table. I love that. I worked in media for 10 years as a presenter and producer in television, mostly lifestyle type TV and travel TV, and worked in Russia as a newsreader for what has become extraordinarily controversial RT, which is really Putin's propaganda arm for the West. And that was an extraordinary experience. But that was 15 or 17 years ago now. And since then, I've worked in leadership development and helping people to communicate more effectively with each other, to build stronger teams, to be better at what they do.
There'll be quite a lot of people who listen to this who've never seen an interview at a music festival.
Yeah, I must admit, I love going to, and I've been to a couple of festivals where I've been, for example, I went to WOMAD one time a few years ago, and it was amazing. Of course, it's overwhelming because there's stages everywhere with people performing and lots of kind of, concepts from different stages, different styles of music. It's like a huge smorgasbord. And in one of the buildings at WOMAD, there was another kind of event going on that was musicians being asked to tell stories, and they also cooked something. It was like a little kind of, you know what I mean? They had a little interview situation where people from different countries who were there at WOMAD made something from their country, and as they cooked it, they talked about their family and their mum cooking this and what they used to sing in the kitchen and so on. And then everyone got to try a little bit of this food, and I thought, what a fantastic concept. And I found myself on each day of the festival going back to this slightly quieter venue and format to be able to hear, the privilege of being able to hear from people in their own words, how they got to where they are now, which is right here at this place. They're performers, they're singers, they're artists, and you probably never even get the chance again to hear some of those stories, from them. And so to me, it's such an integral part of what might happen at CresFest, because it's such a luxury to have the chance to be in conversation with people who otherwise are performing on stage, singing music. You'll take home that music. You might go and buy that music. You understand about where they've come from, but you haven't actually had a chance to listen to them talk about where it comes from, why they do it, how we make it, and so on. So for me, it's such a beautiful chance to take a little bit of a breather from the performance and actually be in that small space, actually having a conversation. It's a luxurious state to be in.
Yeah, for me, it's about the layers of meaning in people. We see them as performers, musicians as performers on stage, and we get to experience their art, and we can be deeply moved by that, and it can be beautiful and engaging. And I think then when we can speak to them and ask them questions and have a conversation, we're kind of taking away that layer. And so we're left with the real person. What's the person's stories that brought them to that music or that interpretation of their art or that way of presenting their art? What have been their formative experiences? What's given them meaning? And I just love the way that the conversations will often go in, despite being relatively well planned, they can go in completely different directions, and you don't know where you're going to end up. And I think that every artist has very strong reasons for doing what they do, and it's not always completely apparent what those reasons are when they're performing. But we have the opportunity here to understand those artists more as people.
Years later, and sing at the tops of our voices. One woman sings, we all answer. Then a long journey to a faraway country, Australia. I'd never seen the sea before.
I particularly loved, well, there's two that stand out in my mind that have been fantastic moments where I did have that feeling of like, wow, here we are now. We're here now. I've got to be in this moment. This is happening right now in front. We're in it. And the first one was Kavisha Manzella and Arnold Zabel, who were talking with each other and with me on stage about their parents, the state of sort of coming from migrant backgrounds, the folk music of their own childhoods. They had beautiful stories to tell about their parents, and they just swapped stories back and forth. And then Arnold said that he remembered hearing about Kavisha the very first time when he heard this voice on the radio singing Wedding Sheets. And he stopped in his tracks, he said, and I thought, who is this? Who is this? This is the voice. This is telling everyone's story. And she said, oh, I'll sing it now for you. And she got out her guitar and sang it. And it was quite a spellbinding moment. And then she sang something else. And I remember the audience was singing along, and Arnold grabbed my hand and her hand. He was sitting between us, and he lifted up our hands, and we were just on stage, sort of orchestrating this beautiful moment of singing along. That was a lovely, lovely thing to do. Yeah.
Oh, that's really beautiful.
My suitcase in my hand, I step off the land onto the boat. Adio.
One of the most amazing interviews, I think, was with Gina Williams, who is a Noongar woman from Western Australia. And she and her partner, Guy Gauss, who's just a sublime guitarist, joined us in the courthouse. And Gina talked about the fact that there are less than 400 speakers of the Noongar language left. And she and Guy have been, for years now, teaching the language through music, and particularly in schools. She estimated that they've performed to over 3,000 school children, and using Noongar language with tunes that people already know. And they treated us to this beautiful acoustic rendition. Guy just put his guitar up onto the couch, and they gave us this Noongar language version of the Churches Under the Milky Way. And that, to me, was what the conversations are about, that connection. It was so moving. It was beautiful. And again, they were so generous. They taught us all in the audience there to say hello in Noongar, which is Kaya. And then Bordawan and Borda Jinani, which means talk soon or see you soon. And there's something about the generosity of spirit that the musicians bring to these interactions that I always come away immensely grateful.
really can't go past the amazing experience, almost a bucket list experience, really, for me, which was one of my guests that I was in conversation with was the fantastic Casey Bonetto, who's, a singer, songwriter, fantastic writer, satirist, all-round fantastic performer, broadcaster, and so on. And he said, I want to bring along a guest of my own, if that's okay. And I said, yeah, that'd be great. Who do you want to bring along? And he said, well, don't say anything, but I'll bring along Eddie Perfect. So you can imagine how wonderful it was. I did very little on stage, as you can imagine. I just kind of said, so tell us about how you've collaborated in the past or something like that. And they played music. They talked about what they'd done in the past. They talked about what they've both done recently. They discussed funny ways that they'd kind of improved. It was like a little kind of masterclass in watching two songwriters at the top of their game, I would have to say. He knew just what they were doing. Relaxed and talking to a small group of people. They were having a conversation with each other and allowing us in the room to kind of be eavesdropping on that creative little thing. And it was wonderful because I know that when people came in and saw who it was on stage, they immediately, I was watching them, got their phones out and texted their other friends. And by the end of that session, the courthouse was full of people who had come in during the session and were just watching, just thinking, wow, this is a great thing to suddenly walk into a little building in a country town and listen to, and we'll never have the chance again. And if you weren't there, you missed it. There's something really beautiful, I think, about that thing of presence where much as it's great to document things and to record things and so on, and gee, you'd not find a bigger fan of podcasts than me. I love them. At the same time, I love the way that sometimes music and art and the making of things is ephemeral. It's a bit like when you put a play on and you invent the play and you make all the sets and people come along and they believe in that world for the 90 minutes and then you transport them. They're taken somewhere else, and then you, at the end of the season, you pull the set down and you stick it in the bin, and that only exists now in the minds of the people who got to experience that together. And I'm hanging on to that collective experience. I think we need that as humans. That's a very old thing, that we, as a primate species that has language, we have that collective experience. Every culture hums together, sways together, claps together, makes that music together, and finds their kind of harmonic, collective self together. And so I often think if we can just make those little moments happen and open up again, it reminds us, it makes us think, oh, I remember this feeling of being transported by this sense of joy and wonder, that I'm lucky to be here for this little moment. Like I love those moments opening up.
I drove with abandon like Susan Sarandon's Louise. And my fact of adherence to matters of clearance betrayed.
Well, firstly, I was in the audience for the Casey and Eddie show, and it was fantastic. They were so genuine and so genuinely funny and relaxed. It was great. It was a great conversation. I interviewed Kavisha when we presented The Joys of the Women, which it was the 30th anniversary of this film that Kavisha had made with the Italian Women's Choir in Fremantle. And they'd travelled to Italy, and it was an extraordinary film. And that's the other thing I perhaps didn't mention earlier, that I'm a filmmaker, and so it was great to see this film again. And I'd seen it maybe 30 years ago. And Kavisha is such a joyful, generous person, and I mentioned to her that. And we were lucky enough to have Kavisha stay with us too, which is another thing I would say, Neil, for people who are listening. Have some musos come and stay with you. We billet people out over the festival, and it enriches the experience enormously. Anyway, I mentioned to Kavisha that when our first daughter, Rose, was born, we had a CD of Kavisha's, and it was the only CD that we took into the birthing centre. And when we were when Rose had been born, she was lying on Cat's chest, and we're in this big bed just getting to know each other, and we were playing Fisherman's Daughter, which was the first music that Rose had ever heard. And it so happened that Rose, who's now 26, came down to us for the weekend to go to CresFest. And she and I were sitting in the front row at Kavisha's gig, and Kavisha sang Fisherman's Daughter and dedicated the song to Rose. And we were all just had tears pouring down our faces. It was so beautiful. So that was just an amazing experience.
But she laughed out loud and danced around and put her arms around me. Yeah. Catch me a fish from the smoky water. She's my grandma. She's a fisherman's daughter.
I should let the listeners know that this time, rather than trying to cram all the conversations into the courthouse, which on a good day seats 50 people, we're taking them out into the bigger venues in Creswick, and so there'll be more opportunity to hear these two, Cate and James, talking with musicians and various other people. So, Cate, should we take it in turns again?
Yeah, well, just speaking of language and singing in language, which is such a privilege for all of us, and such an important thing to be seeing happening. One of my guests is Stuart Joel Nugget from the Northern Territory, a Jingili man, and he is now based in Alice Springs, but he runs something called the Jingili Song Project, where he teaches and writes songs in language and does much the same sort of thing. So that idea of teaching us, taking something and giving it so that we have a chance to learn and to listen as well. Not just school kids, but all of us. So that idea of telling stories and forming connections and making that your kind of, sort of primary passion, I just find that the people who are on that journey invariably wonderful to listen to and be able to be with. And I'm very lucky to be also talking to Joe Geyer, who needs no introduction. He's off the back of his show, Rations to Wages to Treaty. He's been touring. Joe Geyer, well-known Indigenous performer. He says, I want to provide change and understanding melodically and harmoniously through sharing Aboriginal history. So he's bringing that story, and, he's got this other sort of I want to hear from him what it's been like to be an Aboriginal man with that kind of mission in his own sort of performing and songwriting life. But also he's supported people like, Ray Charles and B.B. King and Jimmy Cliff and so on. So he's, what an interesting perspective to bring to these sorts of conversations, the large and the small, and the passion that you bring to large audiences and small audiences.
Cate, how do you prepare for the interviews? Do you do you just go by the seat of your pants, or do you send questions backwards and forwards to the performers? Or?
Yes, sometimes I do. When I have a look at people's bios, I tend to get in contact with them and just, first of all, ask what they would like to talk about, because they might have something very specific that they want to talk about or talk about. There might be some no-go areas that they don't want to talk about as well. So you want to make sure that you're prepared. And also, as James was saying, sometimes things can take a very interesting direction that you didn't expect. And you have to be ready to kind of, I guess, be listening well enough that you can go with that and maybe put aside your prepared questions and see where the artist wants to take the conversation, because it's invariably going to be a more organic and interesting conversation when you actually are able to not just have that interrogation style, but actually have a conversation rather than an interview, I suppose. They get to talk and maybe sing something, or I'm always looking for where there might be synchronicity between the guests that I'm going to be talking to, and that might be something like a little quote or a little idea. For example, one of my guests is the wonderful Judy Turner, for example, who's founder, musician and coordinator of the festival itself, who just received an award from the Folk Alliance Music group for her contribution to folk music. So she's one of those people who's an exemplar of art is making good things happen for other people, and that's not very different from Kofi Kunkepi, who's from Ghana, who's going to bring along his calabash and dancers, and there's going to be showing us dancing and maybe doing a drumming workshop. It's people making good things happen for other people to bring that joy. So maybe bringing the joy in all those different ways, bring the illumination and bring the joy might be my little kind of touchstone through my conversations, I think.
Mon amour, je t'aime, et si tu es tout près de moi, mon amour, je t'aime.
James, what about some of the people that you're going to be interviewing in the course of the festival?
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to have seen who I'm interviewing, and Neil Murray's the first one who was on the first on the list, and the first one that caught my eye. Of course, Neil Murray was this guy from Western Victoria, Gunditjmara land, and he sort of snuck off from there in the late 70s with his guitar up to the Northern Territory, and then he emerged a few years later as the one of the founders of Warumpi Band. Fantastic band that predominantly Aboriginal musicians, and Pete Murray, and so he's done a lot of solo albums since then. I'm really interested in just about everything about him.
Colonization spreads like a disease. The imperial flag flaps lazy in the breeze. Horse sweat and leather, clink of iron and steel. Native people in chains, the suffering they still feel. All the sorrow in the world can be traced right back to an invading force and the humanity they lack. It's the same. Tears of Wabelina, it's the same. Tears of Wabelina.
I haven't formulated any questions at this point, but what I do in terms of that preparation question is I've already started listening to all of the artists that I'll be interviewing on Spotify, and I know Spotify's not great to artists in general, but in terms of research, it's great to be able to listen to their work. I also tend to read lyrics if I can find lyrics for songs, just to get a more of a sense of it. and have a conversation as Cate does with the artist before the festival. The next person is Nati Dolaisi from Solomon Islands, and I've just started listening to Nati's traditional chants and tribal songs. He's from Lao in the Maelita province in the Solomons, and there's very much a theme of peaceful coexistence here, and I was really interested when I was reading about him to hear this idea that these songs come from before people were the center of the universe. In fact, when people were just part of creation, and I love that I'd love to explore that a bit more with him. I'm interviewing Deborah N, who sings Torres Strait songs, and she has this amazing voice that she sings blues and R&B.
Here you go, and the wind that carries you will be strong, and you know you're not alone. Here you go.
And then there's a guy called Uptown Brown, and I'm a little bit fascinated because he's a one-man band. He plays in this sort of plaid suits, like really thick suits. He must get so hot, but and he's got all this gear on his head and back that he's made in his own shed out of stuff. And I've had to listen to some of his music, and he's fantastic. He's a really quirky character. So I'm looking forward to meeting him and hearing some of his stories as well.
Where else but CresFest is that kind of stuff going to happen?
Yeah.
Where else is it going to be? Like it's the way to. It's like a channel that allows these things to come in and open up into that beautiful atmosphere of the weekend. I just think it's got a feeling like no other festival. Everyone just feels so enlivened and enriched and energized by what's going on that it's such a pleasure to be a part of.
It's the same. Tears of Wibelina.
I would just encourage people to get along to the conversations, because they'll get some music, but they'll also get some of the layers of the person behind the music.
Governments don't learn from their mistakes. They're still locking asylum seekers away. Desperate poor souls just want to be safe, to escape from war.
It's just lovely spending time with Cate Kennedy and James Freemantle. The interviews part of the CresFest program has gone from strength to strength, and it was audience suggestion that we should get it into the larger venues this year, so we're responding. We're so lucky to have such thoughtful people as Cate and James to be the brains behind it all. Personally, I just can't wait to get into the room and hear the conversations. Cate, James and I want to acknowledge that this CresFest World podcast is recorded and made on the land of the Jarrah people who've been playing music and talking about it for many thousands of years. We're proud to follow in their footsteps. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, please follow us and rate us. Send a link on to your friends. We've got more than 2,000 listeners now, and it's growing with every episode. Help others get on board. Thanks. The song we're listening to here in the background is Neil Murray's Tears of Wibelina, and of course you'll be able to hear Neil being interviewed by James Freemantle at this year's CresFest. This has been This CresFest World. My name's Neil Adam. I hope you enjoyed it today. In the words of John Ebden, an old BBC presenter of my childhood, if you have been, thanks for listening. See you next time. Bye-bye.
You can feel tears of Wibelina.